Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Breakdown. It is September 7th, 2023. I'm your host, Nate Pike. We have so very much to talk about for what was otherwise a quiet week in Alberta politics. There wasn't that much at the Alberta political level going on. The legislature doesn't go back into session until the day before Halloween. It's summertime. Danielle Smith finished her tour of the Albertas, and so you wouldn't think that there would be that much, but there's a lot. We got a lot to talk about. We don't normally veer into the federal politics sphere. We try to stay in our little Alberta politics sandbox because that's where we know some things. But there is one thing that has to do with Alberta, regrettably. It has to do with Canada, also regrettably. And it has to do with people, in effect, appropriating the history and the valor demonstrated by our World War II veterans, not just our World War II veterans, but all of our veterans, World War I and World War II. It's just gross. There's an individual who has had previous affiliations with the Juno Beach Center. And one of the things that has come out of the convoy is that this individual has tried to leverage their previous history with the Juno Beach Center to give them and their anti-vaccine, pro-convoy, insurrectionist views validity. The Twitter handle even references it. And it's super gross. That's just the bottom line. Anybody who thinks that the people who were the argument that we hear about the convoy, they couldn't have been terrorists. They were running around in bouncy castles and having barbecues. Well, if they couldn't have been terrorists because of the bouncy castles and the barbecues, guess what? They couldn't have been freedom fighters either. So maybe they were just a bunch of, I don't know, some of them misguided, some of them deliberately exploitive. But the trial of two of the convoy organizers, leaders, is going on, so this is getting some traction. So we wanted to take a quick sec to talk about the statement that the Juno Beach Center had to release today. It's come to our attention that an individual has used her past relationship with the Juno Beach Center to spread political messaging on this platform contrary to the values established by our founding veterans. We have blocked and removed the account from our followers. The Juno Beach Center does not support Tamara Lich or the Freedom Convoy. Now, of course, as soon as they posted this to the Twitter machine, all of the bots and the convoy supporters, like I said, certainly not freedom fighters, came out of the woodwork, and they left a bunch of horrifying comments where people who have only been alive for 20 or 30 years claim to have even the vaguest understanding of what the Juno Beach Center is, what respect for veterans is, especially given that there were people who defecated on memorials and monuments during the Freedom Convoy. You kind of lost the moral high ground there, kids. Props. The Juno Beach Center had to know that as soon as they put this statement out that they were going to get all kinds of trouble, but they believe in their values. They believe in people not appropriating the sacrifices that veterans have made over the many years that they've been making sacrifices for this country. So we wanted to start off by highlighting that kind of bravery, because make no mistake, that is real bravery. To do that sort of thing, knowing that it was going to polarize people, knowing that it was going to make people say and do ridiculous things, that does take real bravery, certainly more bravery than a mob of people descending on the capital of the country in an attempt to overthrow the government. And let's not forget, as much as they might have changed their mind because people didn't get behind that ideal initially, that's what they showed up to do. So, getting that out of the way, let's get into the rest of the stories that we have to talk about tonight as we continue our roundup of Alberta politics. The first thing that we got to talk about is a story that's kind of fallen through the cracks a little bit. That's why we're here. We like to try to fish them out of the cracks. There's been some interesting conversations that have gone on in the last little while over clear cutting in K country. So this is not a small thing. Reading from the story that's on the screen right now, over 1,100 hectares of logging is planned for the Upper Highwood in Kananaskis starting this winter and continuing for 2 years and the company's called Spray Lakes Sawmills, a company based in Cochrane. Now, there's some people who have said, well, it's part of forestry management. The problem is the stuff that's getting cut down is a lot of old growth forest. This is not just we're making space. This is we're removing established, important part of the ecosystem of the Kananaskis. And this has generated a lot of controversy for a lot of different reasons. One of the reasons why there was some controversy generated has to do with the fact that there wasn't, but there is kind of now a bridge. So what the story here is, the company that was setting up to do all the clear cutting, there was a creek in the way. Now, it's important to realize that this creek is, of course, habitat to some species that are at risk, some species that need protection. It's also important to note that when it comes to areas that are established as protected areas for species that need that protection, there is a boatload of rules and requirements in regards to putting any kind of infrastructure in there, because it has to be made sure that that infrastructure isn't going to harm that environment. There were some people who had some very real concerns because there was photos and videos posted where the company that was building this bridge was just driving straight through the creek bed, and they weren't taking any of the mitigating efforts that are supposed to happen. Well, Ottawa announced that it was going to be investigating the logging situation because of this bridge that was being built. This week we found out, though, that the CPAWS, which is the Canadian Parks and Wilderness Society of Alberta, they put out this tweet where they said, "We've received confirmation from at Fish Oceans Canada that Spray Lake Sawmills does not have a Fisheries Act or Species at Risk permit to construct any kind of crossing over the Highwood River." So, to be clear, what it appears at this point is this logging company said, "Oh, we can't wait to get to that old growth forest. It's going to be so good." So instead of going through the permitting process and the steps that are required to make sure that that environment is protected and dealt with appropriately, they just kind of plowed through. Now, this gets to be pertinent really quickly, given the current discussion that's going on in Alberta about renewables. For anybody who's been listening to the show for any length of time, Danielle Smith announced beginning of August, I think it was August 3rd, that, hey, you know what, that all that renewable development, there's so many people, literally so many people who want to build renewable power generation in Alberta, that the government office, one of the government offices that approves these programs, they're overwhelmed. Plus, they've got some questions about making sure that people put money up front to make sure that any sites are remediated. And also, there's some people who don't like how solar panels look. And wind farms. They don't like how those things look. That's the justification that's been offered up for why renewable energy development in Alberta had to be paused for 7 months. Now, it's a pretty weak justification, especially given the people who requested it have changed at least 3 times during the course of this debacle. Initially, Danielle Smith came out and said, "Hey, you know what? It was the AUMA and the AESO, 2 of the regulatory bodies involved in approving these energy projects. They requested it. Look, we got the letters that say they requested it." And then people read the letters and said, "No, that's not what it says. They didn't request anything here. They acknowledged that this was what you were going to do, but they didn't request it." And then she was like, "You know what? It's the RMAs, the rural municipalities of Alberta. They requested it so hard that they put forward 2 motions to ensure that there was a pause." And then people went and read the motions and said, "No, that's not what happened either. There's no request for the motions." And in fact, the president of the RMA came out and said on the Ryan Jesperson show, "Yeah, no, we didn't ask for the pause." And then when the mainstream media picked up the story, they took a look and the Globe and Mail asked the president the same thing, and they said, "Yeah, no, we definitely didn't ask for a pause." So all of the people that Danielle Smith has said asked for the pause didn't actually ask for the pause. So it's a shit show. But the moral of the story is the justification is our pristine views. We have to protect our environment, the areas that are vulnerable, the arable land, the agriculture. We got to protect it. It's got to be protected. But we have seen almost no comment from the provincial government or acknowledgement from the provincial government on the fact that here's a logging company that's got permission from the provincial government to do all of this logging. They've already broken a boatload of rules. They've already violated a protected habitat, it appears, and absolutely nobody is saying anything about that because it's not presumably related to oil and gas, which is really, really unfortunate because the reality is this is an environmentally sensitive area. And when you have a company that early on in its program seems to be demonstrating a willful disregard for its impact on the environment, that's something that people need to take very seriously. So this is definitely something that we're going to be, excuse me, we're going to be following for the next little bit for sure. Moving on from there, Tyler Shandro. It's been a while since we got to talk about Tyler, but today was his this week saw his very big day in not court, but a law association hearing, law society hearing. So some of you might remember Tyler Shandro's been in a little bit of hot water for a little bit of a while because he did some things when he was Minister of Health. And he had a hearing, but the hearing went on so long that they had to schedule a third day for the final arguments. Well, the final arguments were this week. It's worth remembering. I mean, the headline here is a little bit on the light side because his defense lawyer said that it was what Shandro did was the equivalent of jaywalking. Well, when you're jaywalking, worst case scenario, assuming nobody gets hurt, you're messing up traffic maybe a little bit. Maybe you're not messing up traffic at all. The reality is that when we're talking about Shandro's shenanigans, he did a lot more than that. So the first complaint had to do with the fact that he showed up to a physician's door. Kids are playing basketball outside. Shandro shows up at the physician's door with his wife and then berates this physician because of a meme that was posted about an alleged conflict of interest because Tyler Shandro's wife runs a private health insurance company and Tyler Shandro was at the time the health minister. So that's not a great look on the best of days. Well, rather than ignore the silly internet meme like most adults would, Tyler Shandro went to this doctor's house and then said a bunch of things. That's not great behavior from somebody who's a minister of the crown. And it's definitely not great behavior from somebody who works professionally as a lawyer. He also, and this has been acknowledged, it's been confirmed by the Alberta Health Services, so I don't even have to use the alleged here. He did obtain two doctors' phone numbers. An Alberta Health Services privacy official had testified in that hearing that she found AHS breached privacy legislation by providing the phone numbers to the minister. So they broke the rules to give the phone numbers to two doctors so that Shandro could call them after hours. Abuse of power certainly seems to be. Abuse of authority certainly seems to be. Abuse of position certainly seems to be. That's the allegations. And then the third count against Shandy is his wife received an email from somebody who was quite upset saying, hey, you know what? Shandro, he might say that it's not a conflict of interest, and the ethics commissioner might say that it's not a conflict of interest. But to me, this is still a betrayal, and I consider it to be a conflict of interest. I always will. I'm paraphrasing quite a bit there, but that's the bones of what was raised in the email. So that email was sent to Tyler Shandro's wife, but the response came from bearing in mind there's supposed to be a complete division between the company that was sent to and Tyler Shandro, the minister. The response came from Tyler Shandro from his ministerial email, where he said that if this woman didn't leave his wife alone, then he was going to turn the legislative security loose on her, which is, again, not great, because, again, we're talking about him potentially abusing his authority, abusing his position. So it's a little bit different than just jaywalking. Now, everybody's wondering, when do we get to find out what's going to happen to Shandy? Lots of rumors circulating. Some people saying he might run for office again. Who knows? But we got to wait a while. The Law Society has 90 days before they have to turn in a ruling, a verdict, a decision. So, it might just September, October, November. We might get an early Christmas present this year. Who knows? Moving on from there. And speaking of former ministers, we're going to talk about this guy for a second here. This is Jeremy Nixon. Jeremy Nixon was the former Minister of Seniors, Community, and Social Services. He was originally the parliamentary secretary after the 2019 election, but he lost that gig. He had to resign from it. And the reason why he had to resign from it was because he got caught up in the whole Aloha Gate scandal. He was one of the UCP MLAs and staffers. He was an MLA, obviously, who traveled to Hawaii the year that the provincial government before Christmas was like, hey, you know what? Stay away from your family. You got to isolate, which was good health advice at the time based on the information that we had available. Let's be clear about that. And even the recent decision that came down saying that the orders that were issued by the Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Dina Henshaw, they don't say that the orders were bad. What they say was the process for issuing those orders wasn't followed because Dr. Dina Henshaw did whatever it was that she was told by Minister Shandro, Jason Kenney, and the government. And the Chief Medical Officer of Health is supposed to operate autonomously. She's not supposed to take her marching orders from ministers because they have political motivations, which we saw throughout the entire pandemic. # best summer ever. But at the same time, that Christmas, where everybody was being told to stay home, where everybody was being told not to travel, where everyone was being told you got to have small gatherings, keep it small, maybe do Christmas over Zoom, Jeremy Nixon, he decided to go to Hawaii. Well, he didn't win his seat in the election, but it looks like he may have won a little bit after all, because he has been appointed by Danielle Smith, hired by the UCP government, to be the director of Southern Alberta Office, United Conservative Caucus Office, Legislative Branch, which is a lot of words. So that's got to be impressive or something. But here's the trick of it. A lot of people have looked at this and gone, well, it's up to the party what the party does. But this is not a party position. This is a taxpayer position. So he's being paid not by the UCP and their fundraising. This is a position that he's been given after the election that is being funded and paid for by taxpayer dollars. Now, we did look on the disclosure, the government disclosure, to see if the amount of how much he's being paid is up there, but it's that website hasn't been updated in a little while. So we'll check back on that. Moving on from there, the UCP War Room, which was one of the things that a lot of the UCP leadership candidates, when they were going through the election, they were like, hey, you know what? Maybe that's not the greatest idea. We probably should be spending that much money in that way because, animated Bigfoots aren't that much of a threat when you really boil it down. Well, they made the news again. Because one of the things that happened is the War Room, the Canadian Energy Centre, was initially given a budget in the neighborhood of around $33 million a year, which is not a small amount of money. It's also worth noting that the UCP War Room, the Canadian Energy Centre, was created in such a way that it is almost impossible to find out what's going on internally. Now, it's a government company. And typically, for government ventures, you can FOIP them. We've talked about FOIPs on the show many times before. But the way that this company was deliberately created, put 3 UCP ministers in charge of the company. The budget comes from taxpayer dollars, but there's no way for taxpayers to know how that money's being spent, what it's being spent on. Fortunately, there's and again, this is where I want to say we have amazing journalists in this province. We're very, very lucky to have amazing journalists in this province. And we should be very, very grateful for the amazing journalists in the province. Because while it's not required for the War Room to disclose to Albertans how much money they're spending and when, if they decide to do that outside of Alberta, particularly outside of Canada, well, then you're not just dealing with the other country's rules. One of the big things that came out with this story here is that the center's most, and I'll read from the story, the center's most recent annual report shows it signed a $22 million contract. That's 22 million taxpayer dollars last fiscal year for a media campaign. That's about 3 times its entire government grant from the previous year, because a lot of people were upset with how much money the War Room was getting, the Canadian Energy Centre. And so their budget was slashed, particularly during COVID. How did we find out? Well, this was obtained by this reporter by looking at documents that had to be filed with the U.S. Foreign Agent Registry. So they're doing this advertising in the United States. They're trying to convince the United States, hey, you know what? This energy transition that your government's spending billions and billions of dollars on and leaning into while we're running away from it, it's just a fad. It's like those shoes with the rollers on them. It's not a thing that's going to stay for very long. You want the good stuff. You want the Alberta oil and gas. That's what we're spending $22 million on. And because that campaign is happening in the United States and we're acting as a foreign agent trying to influence the economic decisions of another country, I almost seem to recall somebody being really upset about that a while ago, but I can't quite remember what it was. We have to file documents to say, hey, this is what we're doing. This reporter here, Bob Weber, was able to get a hold of it. And he wrote an incredible story with the Canadian Press where he talked about, hey, this is what's going on here. So that's fun because now we're not just spending money to pay for ads in other countries. We're paying money for other organizations that exist in those other countries to make the ads to advertise in their own country. That's cool. Moving on from there, one of the other big stories, and this is an important one. Now, I know we've spent a lot of time talking in particular about Pride over the last little while, and there's a couple of really important reasons for that. Yes, Pride Month was June. That's the official Pride Month. But it's important to realize that when we're talking about the history of Pride, we're talking about the history of protest. We're talking about marginalized groups, members of the LGBTQ2S plus community, who experienced in different areas before there was a national Pride Month, different kinds of oppression, different kinds of violence, different kinds of hate. And so in all of these different municipalities, Calgary and Edmonton just had their Pride parades a weekend apart. Those dates were chosen before the month of June. It's also important to realize that when we're talking about what's going on with the LGBTQ2S plus community, there is still a lot of work that needs to be done. And we're going to spend a good chunk of the next half hour or so talking about this because it has dominated the headlines for the last couple of weeks, certainly going back farther than that. Now, I want to be really, really clear. Recognition, and it's been said before, I'm not being creative. I don't get to claim to be the smart one on this, but it's been said before many times that recognition isn't a pie. So by saying to someone, hey, you matter, that doesn't mean that the person who didn't hear it immediately after that doesn't matter, especially if the person who matters started with reason feeling like they don't matter. As I've said many times on the show before, I'm pretty much peak privilege. I'm a middle-aged white guy. So I don't have very much to be afraid of at all. I am not in any way wounded or offended or what about me? What about I want some recognition when people talk about the importance of recognizing any group that isn't middle-aged white guys. Because the reality is, if we're talking about Indigenous and First Nations people, they've had to deal with a whole lot of oppression that I've ever had to deal with in my life. They still are. When we're talking about the LGBTQ2S plus community, they are still the targets of an appalling amount of hatred. I don't deal with that. I mean, every once in a while, I get into a little Twitter fight with someone, an X fight, whatever. But that's the extent of my oppression. And I'm air quoting the hell out of that for anyone who's listening to the audio version of this. So it's really important to highlight that. Saying to a group that has been oppressed, hey, you know what? You do matter, isn't diminishing anybody else. But for some reason, there's a lot of people who feel like, if we do too much, there's too much humanizing of people. There's too much making people feel accepted. There's just too much of it. For some reason, people feel that way. But the good news, bad news, is that in a recent poll, and this is from a story in Global News, in a recent poll, 78% of Canadians say that transgender people should be protected from discrimination. Now, they did a bunch of other categories in this poll, and there's some good news. Overwhelmingly, the majority of people that were involved in this poll expressed support for the LGBTQ2S plus community. They believe that the LGBTQ2S plus community shouldn't be dealing with oppression. They shouldn't be targeted with hate. And in the rest of the country, most people will speak up. In Alberta, we're kind of stuck on suck. And that's one of the reasons why we're including this and some of the other stories that we're going to talk about tonight. Because one of the things that this poll found is Albertans are the most likely to say they would not speak up against homophobia or transphobia online. And it's 68% of people. So 68% of people, when presented with blatant homophobia, blatant transphobia online, wouldn't say anything. And the problem with that is that there are a lot of people, and this poll backs it up, there are a lot of people who believe 78% say transgender people should not or should be protected from discrimination. 78%. Overwhelming majority of people believe that members of the LGBTQ2S plus community shouldn't have to deal with hate. They shouldn't have to deal with discrimination. They shouldn't have to live their lives in fear. But when the rubber hits the road, and when it comes to, I might make people uncomfortable if I say something about the really gross thing that they just said or wrote, when that ask happens, in Alberta, we're the worst in the country for showing up. And this is part of the problem that our province has to reconcile. Because we see things that are wrong. We see things that we believe and we know are bad. But instead of saying, not on my watch, you don't, we're afraid. And that's incredibly atypical of how Albertans imagine themselves. And that's one of the reasons why we wanted to talk about this particularly tonight, because it does lead into a couple of other things that we have to talk about. One of the causes for this is we are seeing more and more groups emboldening hateful speech, emboldening conspiracy theories, emboldening that fear. We're going to make you feel really, really, really afraid first, so then you can feel like you have to get control back. So then you can feel like you have to take something back. And we saw that announced this week, where Take Back Alberta continued to dig for the bottom when they announced that they were going to be bringing PhD doctor, to be clear, Dr. James Lindsay, for not one, but two shows in Alberta in October. One in Edmonton, one in Calgary. And this graphic the dog whistles. I mean, we mentioned it on the Twitter machine, but it is absolutely wild that the folks who lit their hair on fire over QR codes during the vaccine passport phase of our lives are now using QR codes and asking people to use QR codes. Boy, that was a passing fad. But there are a lot of dog whistles in this poster. When you take a look at it, the colors are very, very clearly the trans colors. They're the colors that are represented on the progress flag. And it's subtle, but when you look at the top of the Protect Our Kids, you can see that the colors are dripping over. And it's the words Protect Our Kids that are stopping the colors from getting to the kids, I guess, because kids are prone to color. I don't fully get it, but this is a theme that you're going to see repeated throughout the show tonight, because this is one of the design choices. This is one of the dog whistles that gets used over and over again. Now, a lot of people have seen this and said, well, who is this Dr. James Lindsay? Well, to start with, he's not from Alberta. So let's import our protection of our culture, I guess. But he's also a deeply polarizing figure. Now, I don't want to get involved in any more legal problems in the immediate future, so we're just going to go right ahead and read from the Wikipedia entry on Dr. Lindsay. Lindsay has promoted and or been linked to several prominent conspiracy theories. He's a proponent of the right-wing LGBT grooming conspiracy theory and has been credited as one of several public figures responsible for popularizing groomer as a slur directed at LGBTQ educators and activists by members of the political right. Lindsay has referred to the pride flag as the flag of a hostile enemy. In 2001, Lindsay wrote on Twitter that there will be a genocide of whites if critical race theory isn't stopped. His statement was met with widespread criticism, including from the founder of libertarian anti-identity politics magazine Quillette, Claire Lehman, who wrote, James Lindsay, when you're too extreme for Quillette, or I don't know how you say it, that friggin' magazine, when you're too extreme for them, that's saying something. James Lindsay is now peddling white genocide theory, implying that a genocide against whites in the U.S. is imminent, has the potential to inspire racist violence. Such comments are extreme, reckless, and irresponsible. They should be denounced. Lindsay has promoted the far-right cultural Marxism conspiracy theory, which alleges a concerted effort by Marxist critical theorists to infiltrate academic and cultural institutions in order to destroy Western civilization. If any of this is sounding familiar, there's a reason for that. The theory has been wholly rejected by mainstream scholars and has been characterized as anti-Semitic by the Southern Poverty Law Center and others. If any of that sounds familiar, it's probably because you've spent some time on TBA, Take Back Alberta leader David Parker's Twitter space or his social media, or you've heard any of his speeches, because that is basically where the leader of Take Back Alberta, David Parker, seems to be getting almost all of his ideas from. It's as if an original thought is just out of grasp. So instead, he's whipping people up and making them afraid and angry by importing the very worst, some might say, of the American culture wars. This is why speaking out is so important, because as we're going to find out in our next story, when people speak out, when people say, oh, that's not cool, things can actually happen. Which brings us to LaGrange. Now, it needs to be highlighted here that when we're talking about this LaGrange, as tempting as it is to go, oh, it's Adriana LaGrange, it's not. It is somebody who is like distant cousins through marriage. Why is it always cousins when it comes to the homophobes? I don't get it. But it's somebody who's a distant cousin by marriage to the current Minister of Health, Adriana LaGrange. And to Adriana LaGrange's credit, threw up in my mouth just a little bit there. To Adriana LaGrange's credit, she did issue a statement condemning what we're going to talk about. So I want to get that out of the way first. But then let's talk about what it was that happened. So all of this comes out of a social media post that Monique LaGrange posted. She's got some fascinating social media. Don't worry, we're going to get into that. This is the post, and I want to throw it out there. I should probably throw a warning. There's some Nazi stuff that's going to happen in the next few minutes. There's no getting around it because, unfortunately, this school board trustee decided to go down the Nazi road. So this is the post here, and it was a story, only visible for 24 hours, kind of thing, where. There's a picture, for those of you who are listening to the audio version, on the top half, there's a picture of a bunch of kids waving Nazi flags, leaning out of what appears to be a building or maybe a train, who knows. But these kids are waving Nazi flags. This is clearly coming from Nazi Germany. On the bottom half of the picture is a bunch of kids waving pride flags. And the caption that this Catholic school board trustee included with this is brainwashing is brainwashing. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. And we're gonna try to unpack a little bit of it here, and we're gonna try to do so using an example. Teaching people to be tolerant isn't brainwashing. That's not what Nazi Germany was about. It wasn't about, we're going to teach the kid tolerance. It was about, we're going to whip up everybody into a nationalistic fervor so that we can accomplish some truly evil goals. Period. End of sentence. Now, the other piece that we have to get to is the use of Nazi comparisons. Many organizations have come out and said, you know what? You should never, ever, ever, if you're talking about Nazis, you'd best only be talking about Nazis. Don't equate anything to Nazis. Don't compare anything to Nazis. Just don't do it. And there's a lot of different reasons for that. But this was the defense that Monique LaGrange offered up when she did an exclusive interview with the Western Standard. And that in and of itself should tell you something right there. When the only media that you're talking to is the Western Standard, like, your hair's breadth away from the counter signal. Let's just say it like it is. This is what she said in the story from the Western Standard. The story meme is censored around indoctrination and how children are vulnerable to evil agendas. Agendas coming from organizations like Planned Parenthood, the United Nations, or SOGI 123, filtering through culture, LaGrange said. This meme is not comparing or attacking the LGBTQ community. It is about protecting our children and keeping parents as the primary educators. So you see, what she was trying to do, she wasn't trying to invoke the Nazi thing. She was trying to talk about indoctrination. And if that was true on any possible level, then what we're about to show you could not, in any universe, be considered offensive by anyone. So let's just explore, as a thought exercise tonight, let's just explore what that might look like. Because we came up with this. Women crossing their arms are women crossing their arms. And here we've included a picture of two women crossing their arms. The point that we're trying to make here, we could argue, if we were being insincere and entirely disrespectful to our veterans, to the victims of the Holocaust, to the victims of the Nazi war machine. The point that we're trying to make here, if we're going to be disrespectful to all of that and history, is that, you know what, sometimes women just cross their arms. And really what we're trying to do here is we're just trying to talk about sometimes women just want to be comfortable and nobody should judge you for that. And that's a perfectly reasonable sounding argument as long as you're willing to ignore that the picture includes two women, one of which is Monique LaGrange, the other one is Eva Braun. All of a sudden, as soon as you include that background context, as soon as you include that additional information, this picture, which, to be clear, we're including as satire to drive the point home, you should never, ever, ever compare anything but Nazis to Nazis. Because no matter what your intent might be, you are invoking one of the darkest periods in history. And that's not something that you can do and just go like, Oh, la, la, la. I was talking about the WEF or the United Nations or Planned Parenthood. That's not something that anybody should be doing. World War II and the Holocaust and the Nazi period in history is one of the darkest periods in history for a lot of different groups. And for anyone to include pictures of swastikas while they're trying to make a point, the Nazi swastika, to be clear, while they're trying to make some sort of social or political point, has lost the plot. You'll notice we didn't include any swastikas in that picture. But this is a Catholic school board trustee, and she's trying to say, hey, you know what? It's all good. This was just the thing that I was trying to say because kids shouldn't be indoctrinated, all the while putting this out onto social media. And again, this is another one of those instances where if you want to think the dumb thing, think the dumb thing. You're allowed to think the dumb thing. But when you cross the line from thinking the dumb thing to saying it out loud, to putting it out into the ether, to putting it on your Instagram stories or your Thread stories or your Facebook stories or whatever, when you cross that line because you want other people to know that you thought the dumb thing, that comes with consequences. And it should. Because by invoking and comparing children who are supporting inclusivity, who are supporting moving away from oppression to Nazis, to make that comparison in any way is profoundly ignorant. But to do that from a position of leadership as a school board trustee generates real harm, because all you have to do is think about any kid or any parent of any kid who maybe decided, hey, you know what? I'm going to let my kid take part in Pride stuff this year. And maybe they have a picture of their kid waving a Pride flag. Maybe they have one of their kids is LGBTQ2S+. And here is a school board trustee throwing it out to the ether. Hey, you know what? It's just like the Nazis. Indoctrination is indoctrination, except being acceptable, practicing acceptance. Practicing inclusivity isn't indoctrination. It's just being a decent human being. But as the kids say, F-A, F-O. Because there were a lot of developments over the week in regards to this situation. First of all, Red Deer Catholic School put together a special board meeting where they said, wow, this is pretty bad. We should do something about this. And in the course of that meeting, it sounds like there was some drama, because not only did the current chair step down, but the Red Deer Catholic School Board issued a news release. And in that news release, they were very, very clear. Red Deer Catholic Regional Schools convened a special board meeting today on Tuesday, so this was September 5th, 2023, to discuss the trustee code of conduct matter-related procedures and next steps to further to trustee Monique LaGrange's social media post at or around August 30th, 2023. An additional motion was also passed for the Board of Trustees to write to the Minister of Education as to the dismissal of trustee LaGrange. So, to be crystal clear, out of that board meeting, a required majority of the trustees said, yeah, this is way too far. This crosses all of the bridges. It's totally unacceptable. So we're going to ask the Minister of Education to get rid of her, because the Minister of Education is the only person who has that power. That's a pretty big deal. And that comes directly because of the outrage that was expressed towards this mentality. But it didn't stop there. One of the other organizations that is involved with the Catholic school boards is the Alberta Catholic School Trustees Association. And they're sort of if you imagine all of the different Catholic schools across the province as being their own little entities. The Alberta Catholic School Trustees Association is the place where each Catholic school board sends a representative, and then they talk about all of the things that all of the Catholic schools across the all the Catholic school boards across the province should be doing. They issued a statement as well today. And that statement didn't pull any punches either. So this statement comes from Harry Sam, who's the president. As the president of ACSTA, all of these acronyms, make it a little bit more flowy, is all I'm saying. I am publicly confirming that our board voted today to remove trustee Monique LaGrange from her position as director of the Provincial Association for the remainder of her current term. Our Catholic schools love all students as gifts from God, made in his image, irrespective of their sexual orientation and gender expression. Separate school boards are committed to providing a welcoming, caring, respectful, and safe learning environment that respects diversity and fosters a sense of belonging. In accordance with Section 33 of the Education Act, Trustee LaGrange's social media post was unbecoming of an ACSTA director. Removing a representative from our board is not a decision we take lightly, and Red Deer Catholic Regional Schools is invited to select a replacement director to represent them. Given the manner in which the previous director's post has the potential to undermine the charitable learning environment offered by the Alberta's Catholic school system, we consider this to be the most appropriate response. And let's be clear, it absolutely is. That's some leadership. That's exactly the kind of thing that we should be seeing from people in positions of authority when they're confronted with not only something that allegedly the RCMP are investigating as potentially being a hate crime, but even just targeting kids like that. That's something that's critically important. And it can't be said enough how, there's no question that the vocal minority, and let's be clear, as that survey that we talked about earlier clearly shows, they are a vocal minority. They're going to lose their minds over this. They're going to get angry and they're going to get loud, but it's not going to change the fact that 78% of people believe that this sort of thing is exactly the right thing to do. And we need to see, quite frankly, more of it. Because it would be great if we could say, hey, you know what? This this Catholic school trustee, it's the first time this has happened. No other Catholic school trustees have ever said anything super hateful or gross, except for, there was that time just a little while ago. It was like, it was back in not that long ago at all, just a couple of months ago. We're talking about Jonathan Higdon, who is one of the trustees for the Fort McMurray School. And when we're talking about Jonathan Higdon, what did he have to say? Well, he was pretty clear. Opens up with, it's time to be less tolerant of today's worldly ideologies. Doesn't mean I'm homophobic. Just because I said we should be less tolerant of worldly ideologies, it doesn't mean I'm homophobic. It doesn't mean I don't respect people that think differently, but just as much as your opinion is important to you, my views and opinion are just as important to me, and neither of our opinions is going to be less than the others. Actually, that's not true. And let's be really clear on that. If you're advocating for hate or oppression, your opinion means less. And again, here we have that same graphic, that same theme of there's somebody who's holding up a thing and the colors of the thing are dripping on it. And the graphic includes, I will teach my child, male dad, female mom, girl boy, so there is no confusion. This is a Catholic school board trustee up in Fort McMurray. He put up another post. Every child was made perfect, perfectly designed in the womb from head to toe by God. It's an abomination to think that a God made you a male when you were supposed to be a female and vice versa. God doesn't make mistakes. We've talked about these posts before on the show, and we've talked about how unbelievably ignorant and insensitive a comment like that is to anybody who's had to deal with any child born with any kind of a congenital defect or anybody who's had to deal with any kind of miscarriage. Every child is conceived with purpose in this life that comes from God. He knew long before they were even a thought they can be world changers. Now, I want to take a quick second just to highlight the irony, the gross irony of the fact that we have all of these individuals, that we have Monique LaGrange invoking Nazism to try to compare it to teaching kids about inclusivity, about tolerance. Because one of the groups that the Nazis targeted, one of the groups that the Nazis moved into their death camps were the LGBTQ2S plus community. So if anybody is aligning with that kind of ideology, it's certainly not the kids holding the Pride Progress flags. Now you have to know, because of course, it didn't take very long to draw a line from Monique LaGrange to take back Alberta. She's got a Twitter account. She doesn't use it very much. But the last tweet that she threw up was from the beginning of the year. She retweeted one of the leaders of Take Back Alberta, who was in turn retweeting the leader of Take Back Alberta, David Parker. I love to see the people show up to let the rest of the province know that we will have a say in the governance of our province, and now we will be heard. David Parker, the people of Bonnyville are ready to fight for their freedoms. Are you? It's worth noting, there was a recent report this week that came out that ranked Canada as being second in the world. Period. We're the second best country in the world. We were beat by the Swiss, but they have really good chocolate. So what are you going to do? Freedoms in Canada aren't being threatened by institutions. Freedoms in Canada aren't being threatened by government. They were briefly threatened by a global disaster. And that's one of the things that happens to during any crisis. You can say, I've got a freedom to be in my house, but if you are staying in your house when your house is on fire, you're an idiot, and you'd better believe the firefighters are going to do everything they can to drag you out of there. Circumstances change what those freedoms look like, and that's actually built into the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. There's mechanisms for dealing with extreme circumstances, because as people who fought in World War I and World War II know, sometimes sacrifices were required. Sometimes you had to give up the things that you liked in order to preserve freedom on a long timeline. This is a lesson that appears to be lost on all of these people who are just pissed off that they weren't able to go do their sit-in at Tim's like they normally would every Saturday morning. Nothing against Tim's. I love me a good Boston cream. Everybody loves Timbits, except for the dry ones. But of course, we have that Take Back Alberta connection. And there have been a lot of people who have popped on social media to talk about Monique LaGrange and the fact that she is very much, she's not just like a little religious. She's like, she believes God talks to her directly religious, and name. History is littered with people who believe God talks directly to them, and the outcomes are never usually great. What you have to know, of course, it gets worse. It always does. Because it turns out the trustee thing, that's Monique's side hustle. She does a few other things. Let's talk about some of these other things that she does for a quick second. She owns a clothing company, because of course she does. It's called Wisdom's Closet, which is their jokes just write themselves. But she's got a clothing line for Jesus. I wish I was making this up. And you know, there's some people like, they like themselves. They wear a cross. I think that there's a lot of questions to be asked about, like, I don't know, to riff on one of my heroes, Bill Hicks. I have a feeling that you know, if Jesus ever does come back, a cross is probably going to be one of the last things that he wants to see. But, you know, if you want to do that, that's cool. And there's lots of people who wear clothing that reflects their faith. Nothing wrong with that. But Monique here takes it a bit farther. She doesn't just love Jesus. She doesn't just like Jesus. She's obsessed with Jesus. And this is the launch of her clothing company. I'm going to read this because it just like I had to read it a bunch of times, so y'all have to hear it too because I had to read it. So here we go. Today is the day that we team up and partner with Jesus to use his word to change atmospheres throughout the world. I am designing custom t-shirts and apparel with words from Jesus Christ on them. They are Holy Spirit inspired, prayed over, and these t-shirts are a revelation from God. Grab yours today. Get obsessed with Jesus. I just You know, here's the thing with this. I get that there are people who define themselves, who have identity. I have punk rock tattoos because I love the punk rock. I don't try to make everybody around me listen to the punk rock that I listened to in the 80s and 90s and early aughts. My kids many times have said, "Could you turn that off in the car?" And I'm okay with that. I don't ever claim though that any of the merch that I've bought over the years or anything like that is a revelation of any kind. It's a t-shirt. That's all. And that's okay. Sometimes a t-shirt is nice. Sometimes a t-shirt can be a little bit funny. Sometimes it can be a little satirical. But to claim that a t-shirt is a revelation from God, I have a pretty strong hunch. You can't say that every single T-shirt's a revelation from God when you're using the words "obsessed with Jesus," because we did a search and that phrase doesn't exist anywhere in the Bible. So now we're just making up our own stuff, I guess. But I'm going to use this as an opportunity for a little bit of a plug. But don't worry, shortly we're going to be opening up the floor for our open mic, and we got a couple other quick little things that we want to touch on real quick. But if we've been teasing this for a while. Monique's got merch. Guess what? So do we now. It's not a revelation from God that we had some people ask. They wanted like coffee mugs, they wanted t-shirts, and I don't have the time. But we have partnered up with the good folks at AB Poly, who are going to do they're going to do all the heavy lifting for us. So it's abpoly.ca is the website. There's a couple of they're looking at bringing in some other commentators, political folks, and they're going to do all of the manufacturing. So it's an Alberta company. First of all, is the big thing. It's designed by an Alberta company. It's manufactured by an Alberta company. It's sent out by an Alberta company. So these guys are doing all the heavy lifting for us. It's fantastic. But we managed to keep it in Alberta. We got the mugs. We got the shirts. I have one of these mugs because we did a run of these like 3 years ago with the same folks, and I use that mug for coffee every day. I know that sounds like a lame plug, but it's literally the truth. But we also have some other designs as well by request. There's some folks who wanted to see it. There's a lot to unpack here. T-shirt. You can get a breakdown. There's a lot to unpack t-shirt. You want to keep the conversation going t-shirt? Yeah, we got those too. We got all of the things. It's very, very exciting. And if you go to abpoly.ca, you can see our stuff. You can see the other stuff from the other creators that are on there. It's all super worthwhile. So there's the plug. But we got a couple other quick little things that we want to hit on real quick before we open up the floor. And I already know there's like one person who tapped in like within the first couple of minutes of the show. Props for patience. We're going to get to you in just a sec. Don't worry. Before we do, we've got a couple other things that we want to talk about to speak sort of about the power of engagement, if you will. And the first one is earlier this week, we found out we'd made it big because somebody was knocking off our social media. Somebody had created, I don't know who, I don't know why. They did link to our Patreon page, so I guess thanks for that. We didn't pick up any Patreon sponsors out of it, but somebody created the Twitter account, The Breakdown AB5. I wanted to make a bunch of short circuit jokes, but I was told not to because it's too old. Yeah, this account was created. It copied all of the things from us, and there were a few people who were like, "Hey, are you guys doing a bit?" And we're like, "Nope, we do have some bits coming though, but that's not one of them." And thanks to the fact that we have a fantastic, engaged audience who stand up for us a little bit. I love it. Didn't last very long. So I mean, I don't know what the game plan was. Who has this time to knock off? Like, it isn't the first one either. There's one a little while ago. It had like some flames and stuff. I think it's still around, but it's just lame sauce, and I don't care. But who has the time to like completely populate a brand new account to try to fool people into thinking the breakdown saying silly things, because that's kind of our jam. Now we got two other things that we want to talk about. We're working on something fun. It's going to be a corker. Not going to be what you expect. I can pretty much guarantee that right now. But with Take Back Alberta having made their goals clear, they're coming for the school boards. You know, we're being a little bit light right now, but they've been very, very clear about that. They want to take over the school boards. They want to have their candidates like Monique LaGrange become the trustees across the province. They're coming for the UCP AGM, which is happening at the beginning of November. Half of the UCP board is already affiliated with Take Back Alberta. The other half of the board is up for election. Cynthia Moore, the current president of the UCP, is stepping down. She's not going to be running for another term. So the whole thing's up for grabs. And you might, a lot of people will go like, well, that's a UCP problem. But the reality is it's very easily not a UCP problem. Because once you have control of the entire board, you can set the agenda. And that includes what sort of policies come forward. That includes what sort of policies might be involved in removing or installing a leader. There's a lot of potential ramifications of this. So in a couple weeks, we're going to be presenting a conversation with one of the high-ranking members, I'll say, of Take Back Alberta. And it's going to be a lot of fun. We also have a conversation that we're going to be presenting on Sunday with Lindsay Amatia. She is a energy lawyer here in Calgary, and she's also one of the co-hosts of the Your Province, Your Problem podcast. And she's going to help us make sense of not only the renewables moratorium, possible, likely, almost certain motivations for it. And she's also going to help us understand what the 18 interim regulations that were introduced, which seem to fly in the face of the claim that you can't do interim regulations. It gets so complicated so quickly. But Lindsay helps us make a lot of sense of that. But we're going to be presenting that this Sunday. It's probably going to be 2 or 3 weeks. Just prep work. Bring it on. One of the high-ranking members of Take Back Alberta, who for shall the time being go unnamed, that's something that requires a little bit of work. On a totally unrelated note, here's a fun thing that we learned about in the Alberta politics world this weekend. So Napoleon. I love this so much. We're playing some inside baseball right now, folks. Napoleon. The great leader, dictator, whatever, when he died, there's a story, the legend goes. Now, the part of this is demonstrably true because the thing that we're going to talk about is currently in New Jersey, of all places, but of course it is. But when Napoleon died, there were a couple of people that he made fun of, that he made some jokes about, and apparently one of them had a little bit of money, so he paid the person who was doing the autopsy to remove Napoleon's genitals, and they were saved, allegedly out of spite. So Napoleon had his genitals removed, which is, I mean, a lot of the jokes kind of write themselves, but we're gonna let you have fun with the jokes, because we just want to share the description. So first of all, it was described as very, very small. Napoleon had very, very small genitals. This is a thing that we learned in following Alberta politics this week. It has been described as a shriveled eel or a dried piece of leather by the people who own his genitals, who currently reside in New Jersey. Never a dull moment in Alberta politics. But Napoleon had a very small... I'll read the headline. Napoleon's penis size confirmed. Channel 4 documentary calls the artifact very small. Do with that what you will. Now, that being said, we have Elsie, who has been incredibly patiently waiting to share some thoughts here. So we're going to bring her into the spaces. It usually takes a second for somebody to realize that they got to unmute themselves. The little microphone thing on the corner. If you're somebody who wants to speak, all you have to do, as long as you're on a mobile device like a cell phone, apparently you can't do it on the PCs yet. But if you want to add yourself into the conversation, you can do that just by raising your little hand. And that is the end of my vamping. Hopefully, Elsie will unmute herself and we can find out whatever's going on. Either that or the hour that we've done so far has completely incapacitated her and put her to sleep. You there, Elsie? I think we might have broken Elsie. If anybody else wants to speak, like I said, raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll do the obligatory Patreon plug. And if Elsie pops in, cool beans. If she doesn't, well, then we'll be back next week. As always, if you appreciate the kind of content that we're trying to do here at The Breakdown, we would love nothing more than if you signed up to be one of our Patreon sponsors at www.patreon.com/TheBreakdownAB, where for the price of just a fancy little cup of coffee every month, you can help us to continue to produce the kind of content that we do. We got a couple more FOIP requests that are in the chute. Looking forward to report back on those. And also, as always, like I said, if you go to abpoly.ca, you can pick up a fine coffee mug. And I'm just speaking from my own personal experience. It's totally subjective. There's no empirical evidence for it, but it just makes everything. The coffee mugs, just no matter what you put in it, it just makes everything taste better. I don't know why. Plus, you can walk around with one of the shirts and really, really annoy your favorite politician. So wear a breakdown shirt to a meeting with your MLA. Take a picture. We will share the hell out of that on our social media. Looks like Elsie may have fallen asleep. That's fair. I drew drone. But we have Cassandra coming in, so we're going to bring Cassandra in and see what's going on with her. Cassandra's a regular caller, I'm going to say. What's going on, Cassandra?
I was worried because I had to update and then it wasn't like registering and I don't know. So can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. And in fact, I'm even going to take the Napoleon's penis article off of the screen for this part of the show.
I don't mind if it's there. So, it's funny because I was listening to the whole show and everything you talked about. It made me think about my dad, the man that raised me. He, he was a war veteran. He was a veteran of the Second World War, and he was also a veteran of the Korean War. He was in the Navy for the Second World War, and what they did was they convoyed. So the warships from the U.S. that would go over, they would convoy as protectors of those warships to basically take them across over to Europe to fight the Nazis, and that's what my dad did. And he's seen. I mean, I grew up with somebody that had strong PTSD, but because of what he's seen in war, he became an anti-war protester. The other thing he did later in his life is he became a logger. And because of what he saw logging, he became an environmental activist.
I love the turns that this is taking. This is fantastic.
What was that?
I love the turns that this is taking. This is fantastic.
And, it's, when I listen to this, like I know what my dad would say about these people. I know what he used to say. Like Pierre Poilievre was first elected about 2 years before my father passed. And he couldn't stand him. I can't even say the words he used to call him. And he couldn't stand what had become. I mean, he wasn't a conservative, but he couldn't stand what had become of them when the Reform Party merged, because to him, it was everything that he fought against. And, he was also raised Catholic. But he was very accepting of everybody, including LGBTQ plus folks. And, the only thing, and, when we're talking about indoctrination, I'll tell you what, the Catholic Church indoctrinated him because he was very accepting of everybody. Like I said, he was the most accepting human I know. But because of what he was drilled into him from a young age, the one thing that he wouldn't he just couldn't wrap his head around gay marriage. And it went right back to Catholic teachings. That's indoctrination. Like, that was purely indoctrination. That had nothing to do with who he was as a human being, because, as I said, he was accepting of all people, but it was what was indoctrinated. That's indoctrination right there. And so I wanted to make a statement about indoctrination in regards to that. But also, he would not have agreed with anything that's going on right now, whether it be with the LGBTQ plus community, whether it was the Indigenous community or any other community, because to him, that is everything he fought against. He fought so people, not just in Canada, but around the world, could live their lives and be who they are without being admonished or stepped on or put down or hurt or harmed. He believed that people were allowed to be who they were, and it wasn't for us to judge, and it wasn't for us to tell them how they should be or who they should be. And those were the ideals that he fought for. And if he, like, honestly, I'm sure he was rolling in his grave. He was also, by the way, a truck driver and a teamster. And when I knew, like, he was probably just screaming from his grave, watching the Freedom Convoy going on about, we're fighting for the truckers, because he would have been like, what the F are you talking about? Like, and desecrating those monuments would have been very upsetting for him, because, and not because of what he sacrificed, but what he saw others sacrifice, and, firsthand, that caused him to have the PTSD he did, that caused him to become an anti-war activist and fight against things that would bring us to war. And the other thing he used to do, and I want to get to the logger part, is he used to drive us around, and he used to drive us around. We'd go on road trips all the time, all over BC and Alberta, and he would always point out the clear cutting, and he would use that as a teaching lesson to teach us, about the damage that clear cutting does. And one of the things we did, like, I was 10 when he signed up the whole family, we all became members of the Canadian Wilderness Committee. And the main fight at the time was to fight to save the Stein Valley watershed. And the Stein Valley watershed is a watershed that is vital to many communities, like the Chilcotin people, the different bands up in the Lillooet area. The Stein Valley watershed is essential to all their way of life for thousands of years, and to their livelihood, and just supporting people. And, when we're talking about renewables and carbon capture, what drives me nuts is, this is the BC is the second largest rainforest in the entire world. It is it is one of the Earth's lungs. And when you clear cut, and then when what we've seen with climate change and the heats, like in that area last year, it was hotter than the hottest place in the hottest desert in the world. And it burned. And it burned all the undergrowth, and it burned everything down. And it threatened that watershed. And it threatened it again this year. The watershed that we saved. And that ecosystem in there, everybody remembers, like, immediately after those major fires up there, they had major floods. And so the greatest carbon capture system, like there's nothing we can man make that is efficient at carbon capture as a rainforest, or even like the bogs up north and all the peat. Another amazing carbon capture system, but it's also, you know, and so when it rains, all that vegetation soaks up all the water, and that's why you don't see flooding in BC what like you do in Alberta when that kind of rain comes down. It's because it all soaks it up, and when that was gone, it just eroded everything, and then it becomes just this vicious cycle, because then one thing feeds off the other. And so when I saw that article about Kananaskis, I was I was incensed. I was upset because, you know, we need, I've seen the damage that clear cutting has done to BC. Like, like there's hardly any old growth forest left. There's like almost none. Trees that were thousands and thousands of years old. You can tree plant all you want, but it takes thousands of years to grow that tree back. And those big thousands of years old trees, they are more efficient at carbon capture, at recycling oxygen and in all of those things than a sapling. You know what I mean? And so, you know, clear cutting, it's not just that too, is it also, because those trees aren't there to soak up you know, your water and things like this, you know, what happens is it runs off and it's more susceptible to pollution. It can lead to things, and I'm shortening. I mean, there's a lot more science that goes in it than I can articulate here at this time, but you know, it also means that your waters and rivers and streams are more susceptible to toxins and stuff like that, which feed our agriculture. And, you know, whether it's the ranchers having water for their cattle to drink, or growing crops, or whatever it is, these things are essential. They work together and they're essential. So it just outrages me. And I won't even go on. I blasted Danielle Smith's office this week over the phone about the whole renewable thing, and I will go on for another hour if you let me on that. So I won't do that one. But I just wanted to, you know, just say that like this is, yeah, it's just. But the other thing I wanted to mention, when you said that, you know, these polls and surveys about, you know, Albertans not showing up for the LGBTQ plus community.
I saw your
Guess what?
comment in the chat. Go ahead.
Yeah, tens of thousands showed up in Calgary for the Calgary Pride Plane. Albertans, and they drove from other cities, and they came out to show their support and stand up and say, look, there's more of us than there are of you, and we support our LGBTQ plus community.
Totally.
And I wanted to put that out there. And my last note, which is not something that was on the show, but I'm going to keep drumming it up because, you know, I was kind of tweeting back at Mayor Gondik and Councillor Penner, because they were talking about the housing crisis. And I just want to say, this is no longer a crisis. This is a housing emergency. This is an emergency. And like, I am sitting here right now, I'm disabled. I am trying to find a place. In 2013, during the floods, before the floods, there was a 1.5% vacancy rate, and I had to look for a place. And then the floods happened, and then it was zero, and I was scared. But I still found a place to live. Over the past 5 months, I have put in well over a dozen, maybe even 24 applications. I have excellent references. I've got a good landlord references. Not one single person that I submitted an application called a single reference, including my landlord. I was driving around on last week with a friend, and we were just having a leisurely drive, and we're driving around, and when they say there's a housing shortage, there's not a housing shortage. I'm going to tell you that right now. I was driving around, and they're building luxury. They call them luxury apartments. These are rentals. These aren't condos that they're going to sell. These are rentals that they're building, and they're building them all over the city. Like the amount of construction I saw, and these apartments, like the ones that are already built, you can look at them. They're no nicer than an apartment going for like $1,600. But they put luxury in the name, and now all of a sudden they're worth $3,000 or $4,000. There's a place called Wellings in Calgary, 55 plus. It's just an apartment building. It's not a retirement community where you get services. It's just an age-restricted apartment building for people over 55. And they're asking for a small one-bedroom apartment, just a couple dollars short of $4,000 a month. And they are constantly advertising to bring people on. So they're not filling those up. They've got empty suites. And we've got homeless people. And we got people that need suites. And they're all over the place. And so I keep seeing these places being built. When they keep talking about a shortage and we need to build affordable housing, no, we need to start looking at unreasonable profits by these large corporations like REITs and investment funds, pension that are buying up. They're even outbidding smaller people, like people that are trying to buy individual houses, and they're buying up that real estate and outbidding them. And so they're squeezing the average home buyer. They're raising the price of real estate. They're charging. My friend Anne Landry, which I've mentioned before, her organization did a breakdown, or she got it from somebody else. I can't remember who, but they did a breakdown based on Main Street and Main Street and Boardwalk rates, and an analysis of what the cost to run an individual, like what their overhead is to run an individual suite versus how much profit they're making off of each individual suite. And it is outrageous. Housing is a basic human right, just like food and water. And, we're in an emergency, not because there's a shortage of housing. It's because of a lack of political will at all levels of government to put in proper rent controls, to limit, like nobody's against anybody making a profit, but we need to start like limiting unreasonable profit.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, we saw this week the announcement of the lawsuit that's going on against the city of Edmonton, where they're literally suing on behalf of the houseless population, saying people should be, housing is a right. People should be able to be safe. We're seeing increased numbers in the houseless and the homeless population of people who are getting in serious environmental injuries resulting in amputations and things like that. And even in the conversation that we had with the BC harm reduction advocate that we had on just a week and a half ago, there are solutions, but they do. I think you hit the nail on the head. They do absolutely require political will. And I want you to know, we talked about this last week. It is not something that we have dropped. It is a huge and complex issue. So we're trying to make sure that when we have that conversation, it's going to be a bigger than usual episode. We're going to try to bring a bunch of different voices to the table, and try to make that happen in the way that it should be, because it's not something that we want to do a bad job of. So rest assured, we are.
No, and I agree, and I appreciate that. I'm just, I need to stand on my soapbox because I'm literally somebody that should not. I've been living in the same place for 7 years. I should not be facing homelessness in less than 30 days, which is where I'm at right now. And I am. And so I'm just going to and you might hear me talk about it again while you're leading up to doing it, because I cannot get off my soapbox on this one. It is outrageous.
Yeah.
And that's all I have to say.
Well, thank you so much, Cassandra. And yeah, no, I want to be really clear that it's not a ball that we've dropped. It's a big, heavy, complex ball, and we just want to make sure that we don't do a garbage job of carrying it, I guess.
I
Um,
have full confidence in you, Nate. I know you like to go on about how you're not a journalist and blah blah blah, but you do better journalism than a lot of people that call themselves journalists these days. And I have never seen you do a bad job at covering anything, so I'm not worried.
Well, that's spectacularly kind. Thank you. And I would just like to say, I think that the problem is not. I don't think that we do spectacularly great work here at the show. I think the problem is that there are a lot of people who represent themselves as journalists when they're just worse hacks than we are. But that being said, I'm going to bring in another speaker here because we got somebody new. Chris, uh, I have a little tiny screen, so it's just Chris B ellipsis. What's going on tonight, Chris?
Hey, thanks for having me on. First time caller, first time listener, but been loving your Twitter.
Oh, thanks, man.
Um, yeah, so actually, Cassandra kind of segued into my point that I wanted to make, which was what I was thinking of when you both from your Twitter and what we were just talking about. Monique Lagrange and the Western Standard, how we both said the same thing. I made it. I said something similar earlier. It was, oh, of course she's on the Western Standard. It was that sense of like, oh, hey, she's of course, of all the places she's gonna, talk to, it's them, right? And it made me think, well, of course it is. We've been seeing this before. If you look at, for example, just earlier this week, Rebecca Schultz and Rebel Media, the little microphone, the mic was,
Yeah, I
and
know what
then
you're talking about.
you also have that ad that you had mentioned on your Twitter with the Western Standard having that Alberta government ad on their website. I mean, to be fair, there's that thought of, hey, I mean, I don't really know how the ad system works, but it's just that sense of you constantly see the conservative government and different media organizations, or these conservative um, favorites. Again, Lagrange, I would argue, is a favorite for people like the Western Standard, like Countersignal, so on. And you just keep seeing these different pairings of quote unquote journalist, media group, and government leader, conservative leader, someone where it's like they're practically shaking hands, but they pretend they're not.
Yep. Oh, totally agree.
And they're not even pretending half the time.
There's a reason
But
why our
then
pinned tweet is what our pinned tweet is, man.
yeah, it blows my mind. It's incredible, and it leads me to my my last point, which is they keep making this argument that, oh, the CBC is government run, it's politically manipulated and blah blah blah. Whereas at the very least, we can point to them and say, hey, they have journalistic standards, they have transparency to a point that we can't say for any of these other quote unquote journalistic outfits that peddle BS every other day.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the CBC, and I go back to the idea, and we talked about this on the show before, but I go back to the idea that the airwaves are a public space. There's a reason why you license if you're broadcasting on traditional airwaves, why you had to license them. Radio stations
Mm-hmm.
have to get licenses because they're using that public space. Now, the internet has changed a lot of that because now any hack with a webcam and a brick background can pontificate for an hour and a half, but that doesn't change the fact that I think that, and that's one of the things that we're very very dedicated to on the show is we do commentary, we do try to have these conversations, but we also like to make jokes, and we're not journalists, and we shouldn't. That's one of the reasons why, like, I really appreciate that Cassandra finds value in what we do, but we're not journalists. We're commentators. We're satirists. I mean, like, I've got my not Jason Kenney puppet 4 feet away to me on my left here. What I find sad, and what I find tragic, quite frankly, is that the right, air quotes, has figured out that if you call yourself a journalist, there's a lot of people who will just go, okay. And that's the end of the conversation. And so you can have organizations that present themselves as being journalistic entities, and everybody goes, okay. and they don't question them because, you got to trust journalists. And at the same time, like I take a look at the stuff that a certain media organization / charity puts out. Again, refer to the pinned tweet.
Yep.
Um,
Understood.
they go out of their way to polarize the people who are consuming their content, and at the same time delegitimize the mainstream media and real journalists. And that's one of the reasons why I think it's so important that, like if organizations wanted to do the same kind of thing that we do, or if they just wanted to be commentary, if they wanted to do editorial stuff, I don't have a problem with that. I think that there's value in that. That's why we continue to do what we do here. But you got to be clear about what you're doing. Like, I don't wear a suit and tie on the show, A, because I only have one, and that's a lot of laundry. But B, because I don't want people to look at and we've had this conversation with the team here. I don't want people to look at it and go, they're doing serious journalism. Because you know what? Every once in a while, we're going to talk about Napoleon's penis. And I don't want to give that up.
Sorry, actually, if you don't mind me adding one more thing.
Yeah, by all means, man.
I come from I'm actually a journalist. I went and I kind of in and out of the work for a while, but I went to J school back in McEwen, early 2015, around that time. And what ended up happening was we actually had a lot of conversations about this, the concept of what it means to be a journalist and whether there is citizen journalism. Basically, the idea is that if we, say, citizens can't be journalists, this, citizen journalism thing isn't real, then we end up losing out on actual serious reporting by people who may not be classically trained or may not have, gone through the same educational aspects as someone like me has. But at the same time, they're still, following the story. They're still reporting accurately. They're still, they're doing their work. And so we kind of had that debate back and forth throughout my time, when I went to J school. And it's still kind of a discussion now. And I think the problem is it comes to a matter of honesty. Are you reporting on something accurately, factually, or are you trying to push a narrative? And there's kind of a saying in journalism where you say, it's not your job to report on whether this person says it's raining and that person says it's raining. It's your job to go outside and check if it's raining.
Exactly.
There's that sense of you have to be honest with your reporting. And so you see these, different groups, and they're not. They go and they say, like, okay, here's a headline from a group I'm not going to mention. They say, Notley blames climate change for wildfires while RCMP is looking for arsonists. What they don't say in the actual, until you read the story, is this is an arsonist from a case back in April and May, not related to the fires that have been happening all summer.
Exactly. And that's the thing. I think that there's, I would argue from my personal standpoint, and I probably have to put the disclaimer in that I'm speaking for myself and not for the whole team here, because otherwise I'm going to get some texts as soon as I get off the air. But I would argue that, if you're following a topic, if you're trying to inform people, I would say what we do here most of the time. We're just trying to be informed conversationalists. And I think that there's a big difference. There's no question. I just did like an hour on this school board trustee should go away for all of these reasons. I've got an agenda. There's no question about that. There are other members of the team who certainly have agendas. There's no question about that. But we try very hard to be transparent about that. We try very hard to make it clear, hey, we're not journalists. We're trying to have an informed conversation. And that's one of the reasons why these open mics with this is so important, because every once in a while we have somebody who pops in who has something that they want to say that is new information, is challenging. I think you hit the nail on the head. Is I would think that the breakdown is a group that is saying, hey, it's raining outside, and I think that there's a big difference. But and we looked out the window, but we didn't independently verify, go outside and confirm that it's raining, and that's one of the reasons why, again, I sing the praises of the journalists who are doing the work of journalism in this province, because if they didn't do what they do, so many of the conversations that we try to facilitate and engage in wouldn't be able to happen. Um, and I think that that's so dangerous. But I think you're absolutely right as well. Like the misleading headlines. There is one of the big problems with citizen journalism. And to be in all fairness, to be full disclosure, I study journalism and broadcasting as well. That's one of the reasons why the delineation between what we do in journalism is so important to me. But I think one of the big delineations is you take a look at some news, online news, citizen journalism, rana. They're trying to make a model work that relies on subscription, that relies on we got to keep people fired up, because that way they're going to keep coming back. And if we paywall a few things, then what they'll do is they'll pay us for it, and then we just got to keep getting them fired up and keep saying all of the things, because that drives all of the revenue. So that's what we got to do. They're trying to take the failed model of, I hate using this term, but mainstream media, where the model was, we'll put Friends on, we'll do some sitcoms, we'll pay some ads, and then we'll run the news, and then we'll run some local ads, and we'll try to make ends meet. And unfortunately, the disruption that came out of the internet is now you can't make ends meet anymore, because you can do the advertising yourself and be online for way cheaper. And so I think that what we're seeing in some of these organizations that you and I are bleakly referencing is they've figured out that they can use that model, but in order for them to use that model, they have to keep people angry always. They have to keep people afraid always, because otherwise there's no value. There's no what's the value proposition for signing up. And this is one of the reasons why we do things the way that we do things here. Like, what's the value proposition for being a Patreon supporter? We can pay for FOIPs, and it gives you a warm, fuzzy feeling. That's it. We don't paywall anything, because that's not. I don't think personally that is a way to facilitate conversations. So, I wish that some of these organizations would just say, "Hey, we're hyperbolic. You should probably know that."
It kind of goes back to that point, where if it bleeds, it leads. That sense of, we always have to try and enrage, and I mean, obviously that refers to crime and murder, but outrage, frustration. People want to hear drama, and I think that's where these groups tend to try and get their following and get their money.
I would also argue, though, and looking at organizations like the one that we have in our pinned tweet, there is a very real value. And this is something that the right has figured out that the left hasn't. If I'm, I don't know, I'm just pulling this out of the ether, not connected to any events this week, but if I'm Rebecca Schultz and I decide, hey, I want to make sure that my message goes out undiluted, there's no context. If I do an interview with a real journalist, they might ask me some questions and I might have to answer. They could fact check me. Oh, crap. Maybe, though, if I have this other organization that I'm friendly with, and we certainly saw this with Danielle Smith all the way through the leadership race, if I have this other organization that I'm friends with, then they'll let me say all the batshit crazy things that I want to say, and I'll go uninterrupted. I'll go unfact-checked. I can get away with all of that. And I think that there is a very strong argument to be made that the right have figured out, hey, if we have a media apparatus that some days we're being friendly with, and some days we're overtly coordinating with, we can get our message out to more people in the way that we want to. The left hasn't figured it out. The left, and I've said this before on the show, the left is so busy with the minutia and the purity tests and all of that they are not able to coordinate in such a way that they're able to match that apparatus that has a 15-year head start. I mean, I will always go back to the Take Back Alberta screen capture that we were sent and verified, where the leader of Take Back Alberta, David Parker, included in his comment about, hey, we're starting to make some progress on the narrative with these voting machines, and then included a story that was written by his wife, who works for True North. And the fact that there was so clearly message coordinating going on between Take Back Alberta and True North, whatever they are, that to me, that was one of the biggest mistakes that I think that David Parker has made, because it made it very, very clear that True North is in some capacity, whether it's at the highest levels or just at the level of reporting that his wife does, it is a machine to be used by people who have political goals, period. That's it. And I can't think of a media organization that is equivalent to True North, Western Standard, the Counter Signal, the Rebel. On the progressive side of the spectrum, I can't think of anything that exists that has that close affinity with the left. And I think part of the problem, you got me on my soapbox here, and then I'll get out of your way so you can talk some more, man. I think part of the problem is that the left is so afraid of what happens if our message gets fact checked. What happens if we get challenged? They're so afraid of that they simply refuse to engage in a lot of ways with the progressive or center or whatever you want to call it media groups. I mean, we had an interview request in with Rachel Notley during the last election, and we were flat out refused. And I know we were, because we make jokes about the NDP. And that's okay, because I have puppets for that. But the reality is that if, I go back to organizations like, you take a look at the things like The Daily Show did. You take a look at things like Last Week Tonight. Those are organizations. I don't think anybody who went on The Daily Show, particularly during Jon Stewart's tenure, went on and was like, oh, we're going to have us a fully serious conversation of hard-hitting questions. There was going to be some heavy content, but then there was also going to be some dumb-ass questions, like, what flavor of Doritos do you like the best? Or why are you wearing those pants? It's been a while since I've seen a Jon Stewart effort, so I'm riffing a bit here. But there was a willingness to engage with that we don't see. And that's, to me, really, really unfortunate, because I think that when you show that you're willing to laugh at yourself, when you show that you're willing to be like Obama, when he was president of the United States, went on The Daily Show with Jon Stewart. And Jon Stewart has been very clear. Obama was not a Stewart fan. So it wasn't like they were buddies. But it was important to have that conversation in an honest way. And I think we just need more of that.
I think it comes down to, people being able to look honestly at themselves. And if they are, they're able to see what other people see when they see them. Again, Obama with the Key and Peele sketch, or with Jon Stewart, or Biden with the whole Dark Brandon thing. There's a sense of, you can get the joke and make fun of it. And I think the problem is we don't have that in Canada right now. The right has always been able to make a mission statement. It's always a mission. It's always, we have to have the same belief, the same, not saying that we don't all have the same ideology, but there is always kind of a sense of, it's mission oriented. We have to conquer, or at least maybe that's not a fair way of saying it, because obviously there's, certain other examples of like red tourism or things like that, where it's not always the same thing. Sorry, I'm getting into a completely different tangent. Let me kind of roll back there. I do think that it's really important that we need to both support, serious journalism, mainstream journalism, but there needs to be that, I don't want to say a left niche, but someone willing to say, hey, being honest with, like you said, making fun of themselves, making fun of the left position, while also being able to say, hey, that's BS, that's wrong, this is something we need to address that's real. Like, again, looking at, the housing crisis. You see, some jokes where people, I remember, I think, was it Polivier who went and posted that tweet saying, a young couple looking for housing, and it's a couple looking at tents.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You see, it's like that's kind of thing where it's like, hey, you're not taking something serious that everyone finds seriously. You have the thing about finding what's funny and what's serious is, obviously people are making uh, jokes about serious topics, but when people care about something, when people find something so, again, like housing, like addiction, treatment, and these types of issues, um, there's skin in the game, there's family in the game, there's blood in the game, and a lot of these other groups don't. Uh, they're able to twist that into the other.
Yep. Oh, I think we might have lost Chris. Darn batteries. Well, I hope Chris comes back for next week, maybe, so we can continue having a bit of this discussion, because I think this discussion is so important. And this is where I'm a big believer that satire is that's what we aspire to here at the show. And that to me is an important part of the conversation. But at the end of the day, the fundamental thing that I believe 100% is that the foundation of any healthy democracy is a well-informed electorate. And there's a lot of different ways that an electorate can become informed. One of the most important ways is through quality journalism, but you go through history and satire has always been there. And that's what we try to do. I saw somebody saying we do actually have, it's over on my shelf right now, but we do have a Not Smith puppet. We're working on an upgraded version because clearly we're going to be stuck with that for a while. But we do have, and if you go back through the Breakdown archives, you can find the interview that we did with not Danielle Smith. It was a corker. But there's lots of different ways. And again, it comes back to that whole idea of we have to be able to have well-informed conversations. We have to be willing to open up our minds to new possibilities, to new ideas. And we have to be able to recognize when we're wrong. And this was the last thing that I want to hit on before I wrap up the show, because we're coming up close to that 2-hour mark again. But one of the things that's important for us here is, even when we're making jokes, if we make a joke and it flops, all right, whatever. They can't all be funny. But if we make a joke about something and it's factually or demonstrably wrong, or if we hit on something and it's factually or demonstrably wrong, we try really hard to own that right out of the gates. And we had that happen this week. We pointed out that between Pride in Edmonton and Calgary, Danielle Smith, the United Conservative Party, and the United Conservative Caucus did not acknowledge either of those events. Now, when that was written, it was written with those specific things in mind. So the United Conservative Caucus has its own Facebook page. It has its own Twitter page. Danielle Smith has her own very well paid for Facebook page and Twitter page. And the United Conservative Party, same thing. But somebody brought it to our attention that there were 2 UCP MLAs who did, in fact, not only acknowledge Pride, but attended it in Calgary and Edmonton. And we didn't have any problem saying, okay, so there were 2. And that doesn't diminish the fact that Danielle Smith still didn't acknowledge those things. The United Conservative Party, as a party, didn't acknowledge those things. And the United Conservative Caucus, the collective group, didn't acknowledge those things. Props to the 2 who did. There was a point in not very far back history when the UCP made a production out of the fact that they weren't allowed to march in Pride. Now, there's a lot of really good reasons for that, because they kind of went after GSAs in a super gross way. But you go back, Jason Kenney and co., they had their own little Pride breakfast where they had pancakes and stuff so they could talk about those issues. That's gone from the United Conservative Party. That's gone from the Premier's office because she was busy getting taquitos and eating corn, apparently. And that's something that needs to be highlighted. Props to Searle Turton, and I think it was Tanya Furr, who did attend the events. Props to them for being willing to risk the wrath of the David Parkers of the world for saying, hey, you know what? Being a decent human being, being accepting of people, isn't a bad thing. It's not indoctrination. It's not anything other than just not being a dick. So, all of that being said, I want to say a big thank you to all of our speakers tonight. I want to say a big thank you to our chat. I just got to say, I have been jumping in and out of the chat tonight, and you guys are just so lovely. The little community that's going on in the chat is, boy, that's just so great. It's so cool to watch. Thank you for that. Thank you for the conversation. I think it's just absolutely amazing, and it's great that our little ridiculous show is able to help create a space for those kinds of things to happen, because it's super amazing, and we will be quicker with blocking the bigots in the future. But I want to say big thanks to everybody in the chat. I want to say big thanks to our speakers. I want to say big thanks to everybody who's supporting us on Patreon. I've seen already, apparently, a few folks have already ordered a few of those shirts from abpoly.ca. I mean, they're pretty cool. All the cool kids are wearing. It's the latest in back to school fashion. Oh God. So yeah, if you want to have the coffee cup that makes everything taste better, even if it's not coffee, highly recommend it. We'll be plugging that for a little while. We got a couple of other ideas that we're going to be floating down the curve. I love the idea of having merch, especially when I don't have to do any work for it. Other people do it. That's fantastic. So want to say a big thank you to everybody on that. And we're going to play the video really quick, and then I'll do the line.
BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I'll never get tired of that. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you back here next week. It'll probably be Thursday again. And look for our conversation with energy lawyer Lindsay Amatia coming out on Sunday, because you want to know just how much shenanigans are involved in this renewables moratorium. She does not pull any punches whatsoever. Until then, take care of yourselves. Keep the conversation going.